I never thought I would be a widow at 29. Even the word sounded ridiculous, old-fashioned, as if it were from another life, not mine. But fate had decided otherwise, and here I was, sitting in the notary's office, clutching the black leather clutch Fletcher had given me on our third anniversary. Symbolically, it's the very thing I brought with me to the reading of the will. Before meeting Fletcher, my life was a predictable string of modest achievements and quiet disappointments. I grew up in South Haven, a suburb of Memphis, in a house where walls were thin and dreams were big. My father, Gary Prentice, worked as a truck driver and was rarely home. When I turned 12, he just didn't come back from another trip. He sent a postcard from Arizona saying, "Sorry, baby, I'm not cut out for family life." We never saw him again. My mom, Virginia, was left alone with two kids, me and my little brother Noah. She got a job as a receptionist in a hotel, then took a second job cleaning offices in the evenings. My mother often said, looking at me with tired eyes, "Ingrid, you are a smart girl. Study well, get an education, don't repeat my mistakes." I did my best. I finished high school with good grades, got a small scholarship to Memphis Community College. I worked part-time at a coffee shop at night to pay for my books. She dreamed of becoming a journalist, but eventually chose a more practical field, communications. My mom was happy when I got my diploma, the first in our family. After college, I rented a small apartment near downtown Memphis. One room, tiny kitchen, creaky floor. But it was my space, my freedom. I got a job as a call center operator for Azure Waters, a company that serviced pools in wealthy areas of the city. The work was monotonous, taking calls, registering complaints, coordinating the departure of technicians. But the pay was steady, and I didn't expect more than that at the time. I had a couple serious relationships before Fletcher. Kyle, a college guy we dated for 2 years. He was studying biology and had dreams of medical school. We broke up when he got a scholarship to Chicago. Neither of us believed in long-distance relationships. Then there was Michael, a coworker at the call center. Sweet, reliable, but our relationship felt more like friendship than passion. My friends Zoe, Tasha, and Darla were constantly trying to introduce me to promising guys. The four of us had been friends since high school, though our paths diverged after graduation. Zoe became an elementary school teacher, Tasha worked at an insurance company, and Darla did manicures at a beauty salon. Every Friday, we'd meet at the Crossroads Bar on Beale Street, drinking cocktails and sharing stories. "You need a man with ambition, Ingsh," Darla said, stirring a cosmopolitan. "A guy who knows what he wants out of life." I nodded and smiled. I secretly dreamed not so much of a rich husband, but of a true partnership. A man who would see me as an equal, help me realize the potential my college professors had talked about. But months went by, and the only men in my life remained the disgruntled customers on the other end of the phone line. That day, when Fletcher Langford called, started out as usual. I arrived at work by 9, made green tea in a mug labeled, "Today is a good day for a good day," put on my headset, and prepared myself for a flood of complaints. By 11, I'd already handled a dozen calls when the system transferred another one to me. "Azure Waters. Ingrid speaking. How can I help you?" I said the memorized phrase. "Yes, hello," came a deep male voice. "My name is Fletcher Langford. I have a problem with the pool at the country house. Your specialists came yesterday, but they seem to have made it worse." His voice had the authority of a man accustomed to giving orders. I immediately realized that this was no ordinary client. Langford is the name of one of the most powerful families in Memphis. They owned a chain of car washes, real estate, city council connections. "I apologize for the inconvenience, Mr. Langford," I said in my best, corporate voice. "I will personally see to it that the problem is resolved as soon as possible." He described the problem. After cleaning, the water in the pool became cloudy and greenish in color. I wrote down all the details, promised to arrange for the technician to come back the same day, and call back to confirm. "You're surprisingly competent for a call center operator," he remarked before saying goodbye. "What was your name again?" "Ingrid Prentice, sir." "Well, Ingrid Prentice, I hope you keep your promise." I immediately contacted the maintenance foreman, explained the situation, emphasizing the importance of the customer. I called the service department twice during the day to make sure the technicians were on their way to fix the problem. By evening, received confirmation that everything was fixed and dialed Fletcher Langford's number. Mr. Langford, this is Ingrid from Azure Waters. I wanted to make sure the problem with your pool was resolved satisfactorily. His voice sounded softer this time, even with a touch of surprise. Yes, the technicians did an excellent job. I have to admit, I didn't expect such promptness. We try to keep our customers happy. You know, Ingrid, he paused. You're the only person in your company who really seems to care about quality service. That's rare these days. I felt my cheeks warm at the unexpected praise. Thank you, Mr. Langford. I'm glad I could help. Fletcher, please, let's not be formal. 2 days later, a bouquet of white lilies was delivered to the office. Colleagues gathered around my desk with curiosity as the courier called my name. The bouquet was accompanied by a card in elegant handwriting. Thank you for your help. Perhaps you'd like to join me for coffee. Fletcher Langford. Wow, Ingrid! Crystal, the girl in the next seat, exclaimed. Isn't that the same Langford? The car washes, the golf club, the friendship with the mayor? I nodded, unable to believe what was happening. What are you going to do? She asked. I have no idea. All day I thought about this strange turn of events. On the one hand, I was flattered by the attention of a successful man. On the other hand, it seemed unreal that a man in his circle could be interested in a simple call center operator. That evening, I called Zoe. He probably sends bouquets like that to all the girls, I said as I paced around my tiny apartment. Stop it, Inga, Zoe objected. You're beautiful and smart and worthy of attention. Why not? Go for a coffee after all, it's no obligation. After much hesitation, I called the number on the card. Fletcher suggested we meet Saturday at Cafe Osiris, a trendy place downtown. I went through my closet looking for appropriate clothes, but I couldn't find anything worthy. I had to spend almost half my paycheck on a new dress. Dark blue, simple but elegant. On Saturday, I was nervous as if I were going on a job interview, not a date. The cafe was exactly as I'd feared, sophisticated, with white tablecloths and waiters in tuxedos. I immediately felt out of place. Fletcher was already waiting at a table by the window. He was taller than I'd imagined. Dark hair with graying at the temples, piercing gray eyes, impeccable suit. Fletcher was 38, and every year was written on his face, not in wrinkles, but in the confidence of a man used to getting what he wanted. Ingrid, he stood up as I approached the table. I'm glad you said yes. For the first half hour, I could barely string 2 words together. He asked about my work, my family, my education. I answered briefly, afraid of sounding stupid or uninteresting. But gradually the tension faded. Fletcher knew how to listen, asked the right questions, laughed at my clumsy jokes. So you wanted to be a journalist? He asked when I mentioned college. Why didn't you follow that path? I shrugged. Reality. Memphis doesn't have a lot of opportunities for aspiring journalists. Plus, you had to start earning money after college. Mom couldn't help anymore. He nodded with understanding. You know, my family is third generation in the business. My grandfather started with 1 car wash. My father expanded to 5. I've grown to 20 across the city. But when I was a kid, I wanted to be an architect. And why didn't you? Family expectations. The Langfords carry on the family business. That's the tradition. He smiled with a slight sadness. I think that's why I liked your sincerity. You weren't trying to impress. You were just doing your job well. After coffee, he suggested a walk along the waterfront. The day was warm. The Mississippi River glistened in the afternoon sun. We talked about everything: books, movies, travel. It turned out that despite our different backgrounds, we had quite a bit in common. We both loved classic literature, old film noir, and Italian food. By the end of the walk, I'd almost forgotten the difference in our backgrounds. Fletcher was just an interesting man who was a pleasure to spend time with. When he asked if we could see each other again, I agreed without hesitation. Our romance developed rapidly. A second date at an Italian restaurant. The third was at the theater for a Broadway musical for which he had booked tickets a week in advance. Fletcher was introducing me to a world I'd only read about in glossy magazines. My girlfriends were thrilled. Darla demanded details of every date. Tasha asked to see pictures of the restaurants and clubs he took me to. Zoe, the most sensible of them all, once asked, "Are you interested in him? Not just all the glitz and glamour, but the man himself?" I wondered. Fletcher was smart, educated, never boring. He could talk for hours about business, politics, art, but sometimes I caught myself thinking that he was too self-absorbed, too used to being the center of attention. "Yes," I said then. "He's interesting." A month after we met, Fletcher invited me to his house for the first time. He lived in a penthouse in Memphis's most prestigious apartment complex. Panoramic windows overlooking the river, minimalist design, a collection of modern art on the walls. That night we made love for the first time. Everything was perfect: candles, champagne, silk sheets. But something inside me remained tense, like I was playing a part in a movie instead of living my life. Afterward, he lay beside me, ruffling my hair. "You're amazing, Ingrid," he said softly. "You're different from the women I usually meet." "Is that a good thing?" I asked, trying to figure out if it was a compliment or not. "It's beautiful. You're real. With you, I can be me, not the person everyone expects me to be." In those first few months, everything seemed perfect. Fletcher showered me with gifts: designer clothes, jewelry, perfume. Took me on short weekend trips: New Orleans, Nashville, Chicago. I felt like I was in a fairy tale. But gradually, I started to see warning signs. Fletcher would cancel plans at the last minute because of urgent business matters. If we were out with his friends, he would often interrupt me or condescend to correct me if I talked about something he didn't think I knew enough about. Once we were at a cocktail party, and I was passionately discussing the latest political news with Fletcher's partner's wife. He came up in the middle of the conversation, put his hand on my shoulder, and said with a smile, "Darling, don't bore Margaret with your theories. She's head of the political science department at the university." Margaret looked embarrassed. I looked humiliated. Later, when I tried to discuss the incident, he brushed it off. "I just wanted to protect you from embarrassment. You can't compete with her in that area." There was also the incident with my clothes. I bought a bright red dress for a charity dinner. When Fletcher saw me in it, his face changed. "It's too vulgar for such an event," he said coldly. "Wear something more discreet." I tried to argue that the dress was quite elegant, just a bright color, but he insisted. That night I wore the black dress he approved of, and I felt like a faceless shadow next to him. Despite these moments, I kept convincing myself that our relationship was special. Fletcher often said that I had changed his life, that he felt real around me. These words were like balm to the wounds of his casual remarks and controlling gestures. 6 months into the relationship, Fletcher took me to New Orleans for the weekend. We stayed at a historic hotel in the French Quarter. In the evening, he made reservations at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the Mississippi. During dessert, the waiter brought champagne and a small velvet box. Fletcher dropped to one knee. "Ingrid Prentice, you turned my world upside down from day one. You've made me feel things I've never felt before. Will you be my wife?" In the box was a diamond ring so large it seemed almost unreal. All around us, people smiled. Some even applauded. I felt like the heroine of a romantic comedy, an ordinary girl chosen by the prince. "Yes," I said, though somewhere deep inside I felt a strange uneasiness. "Yes, I will marry you." When we got back to Memphis, the maelstrom of preparations had begun. Fletcher insisted on meeting his parents. "They need to meet the girl who stole my heart," he said with a smile, but you could read the tension in his eyes. The Langford mansion was exactly as I'd imagined, huge, immaculately maintained, looking more like a museum than an apartment building. Lowell and Evelyn Langford met us in the living room. He is tall, lean, with a piercing gaze. She's an elegant blonde with impeccable posture and a cold smile. "So that's what she is, your chosen one," Lowell said, pausing to emphasize that he wasn't impressed with his son's choice. All evening I felt like a test subject under a microscope. They questioned me about my family, my education, my career. Every answer I gave seemed to confirm their worst fears. When I mentioned that I'd grown up in South Haven, Evelyn faintly wrinkled her nose as if I'd said something obscene. "And what do your parents do, dear?" she asked, delicately cutting off a piece of meat. "My father, we don't keep in touch. And my mom works as a receptionist at the Riverview Inn." "Oh," was all Evelyn said, exchanging a glance with her husband. Over dessert, Lowell brought up my job. Fletcher says you're a cameraman? He asked as if it were some rare disease. Yes, in the call center at Azure Waters. We coordinate pool maintenance. Of course, it will stop after the wedding, Fletcher interjected. Langford's wife shouldn't be working in a call center. I froze with my fork in the air. We'd never discussed me quitting my job. Yes, it wasn't prestigious or high paying, but it was my independence, my stability. We haven't talked about it yet, I said, trying to smile. There's nothing to talk about, Lowell cut him off. In our family, wives are involved in charitable and community activities. It's tradition. I looked at Fletcher for support, but he just smiled as if it were normal. On the way home, I tried to talk about it. Do you really expect me to quit? We never discussed it. He took my hand without taking his eyes off the road. Ingrid, you don't have to work anymore. I can provide you with everything you need. Isn't that what every woman dreams of? Not every woman, I objected. I like to be independent, to have my own income. Independent? He laughed. Honey, you make pennies. That's not independence, it's an illusion. With me, you'll have real freedom to do whatever you want without worrying about money. I didn't say anything, but something inside me squeezed. That night, lying awake in my apartment, I thought about what it would mean to become Mrs. Langford, what I would gain and what I would lose. In the morning, I called Zoe. I have a strange feeling, I said. I feel like I'm losing myself in this relationship. Ingy, you're just nervous, she replied. You have a chance that many people can only dream of. Fletcher loves you. He wants to take care of you. What's wrong with that? But his parents have made it clear that I don't meet their standards. So what? You're marrying Fletcher, not his parents. Give them time to adjust. Maybe Zoe was right. Maybe I was just scared of the happiness that was finally in my life. After all, wasn't this the fate I dreamed of reading novels as a teenager? A prince who would see something in me that others didn't? I decided to trust Fletcher, to believe that he really loved me for who I was. I quit my job a month before the wedding like he asked. Moved into his penthouse 2 weeks before the ceremony. The wedding was like nothing I had ever dreamed of. Grand, lavish, with hundreds of guests, most of whom I was seeing for the first time. Evelyn took care of everything, barely consulting with me. She chose a classic dress from a famous designer, flawless but not at all reflective of my taste. Determined the venue, the garden of their mansion, decorated with thousands of white roses. I drew up the menu, the guest list, the program for the evening. I felt like a statistic in my own wedding. When I tried to make suggestions, Evelyn politely but firmly rejected them. Darling, you're marrying Langford. It's not just a wedding, it's a social occasion. Trust me, I know how it's done. My side of the wedding looked pathetic. My mom in a new suit bought especially for the day, my brother Noah with his wife and 2-year-old daughter, 3 girlfriends. Across from them was an army of Fletcher relatives, business associates, politicians, and the cream of Memphis society. Mom cried at the ceremony, but I wasn't sure if it was from happiness or the realization that I was entering a world that would divide us more than any distance. After the ceremony, she hugged me and whispered, "I'm proud of you, my girl. You deserve all the best." That night, in the presidential suite of the hotel where we were staying before our flight to the Maldives, Fletcher looked at me with the triumph of an owner who had won a rare trophy. "Mrs. Langford," he said, raising his champagne glass. "How do you like your new status?" I smiled, ignoring the strange feeling of emptiness inside. "Not used to it," I answered honestly. "It'll take time to get used to it." He stepped closer, wrapping his arms around my waist. "You have a new life now, Ingrid. Everything you've ever dreamed of will come true. I promise." I clung to him, desperate to believe I'd made the right choice. Our honeymoon in the Maldives was like a dream, a private bungalow over azure waters, white sand beaches, sunsets that took my breath away. Fletcher was attentive, passionate, generous. It seemed that away from Memphis, away from the influence of family and business, he became a different person, more relaxed, sincere, alive. "Let's stay here forever," I suggested one evening as we lay on the lounge chairs looking at the stars. "If that were possible," he grinned, stroking my hand. Unfortunately, the Langford Empire would not govern itself. What if you sold the business? We could start something new, something of our own. He looked at me in surprise, then laughed as if I were joking. Ingrid, honey, you don't understand. Business isn't just about money, it's about legacy. 3 generations of Langfords have built it. I can't just give it all up. Not even for happiness? Aren't we happy? He raised himself up on one elbow, looking me in the eye. You have everything you could ever dream of. Isn't that enough? I didn't say anything. Even then, at the beginning of our marriage, I'd sensed that for Fletcher, happiness was inextricably linked to success, status, power. For me, it had always been something simpler and deeper at the same time. Back in Memphis, we settled into the house Fletcher had bought for us, a huge colonial-style mansion near his parents'. 5 bedrooms, a study, a library, a pool, a park-sized garden. The first day we crossed the threshold, I felt not joy but a strange numbness. Do you like it? Fletcher asked, putting his arm around my shoulders. I chose it because there's plenty of room for the kids when they show up. The kids. We'd barely talked about them before, but now Fletcher was bringing it up more and more often. It was the next logical step for him. Heirs, the continuation of the Langford dynasty. Let's get settled in first, I said evasively. We'll still have time for children. The truth was, I didn't feel ready. Not in this house, not with this family, not with what our relationship was becoming. I spent the first few months of marriage setting up our new home. Fletcher insisted we hire an interior designer, but I asked him to at least consult with me on key decisions. Sometimes he agreed, sometimes he just chose what he thought was right. The house had a maid, a gardener, and a cook who came 3 times a week. But I spent most of my time with Prudence Quinlan, the housekeeper who had previously served with Langford Sr. Mrs. Evelyn thought you might need help running such a large house, Prudence said the first time we met. She was a short woman of about 55, with short graying hair and shrewd brown eyes. There was a dignity in her demeanor that was not common to servants. At first I was aloof, thinking of her as Evelyn's spy. But gradually we found a rapport. Prudence was intelligent, observant, and unexpectedly direct. You're not like Mr. Fletcher's old girlfriends, she said one day when we were sorting laundry. What were they like? I asked, surprised by her candor. More like Mrs. Evelyn, from the right families, with the right connections. But they didn't have that spark. What you have in you. After that conversation, we grew closer. Prudence told me stories about the Langford family, shared observations, gave me advice on how to deal with Evelyn and Lowell. She was my guide in this foreign world. And it was a strange world indeed. I quickly realized that I was expected to play a certain role: wife of a successful businessman, future mother of his children, ornament at social events. I was to do charity work, join a women's club, organize luncheons for Fletcher's business associates. Evelyn insisted I join the Memphis Ladies' Society, a group of wives of the city's wealthy and powerful men. We met once a week at the country club, drinking tea, discussing charity projects, and gossiping. I felt like an alien among these impeccably dressed, well-fed women with their rehearsed smiles and empty conversations. Ingrid, dear, said Barbara Whitmore, the society's president, you should change your hairdresser. Your haircut is too youthful for the wife of a man of Fletcher's stature. I smiled and nodded, but inside I was seething with resentment. My haircut, my husband, my life. Everything was being discussed and criticized. At home, the situation was no better. Fletcher was staying late at work more and more often, coming back tired and irritable. Our conversations became more and more superficial. He talked about deals, new contracts, political intrigue on the city council. I wasn't interested, but I listened because it was important to him. When I tried to talk about my day, about a book I'd read, about a new exhibit at the art museum, he listened half-heartedly, often interrupting or simply changing the subject. By the way, dinner with the Robertsons tomorrow, he might say in the middle of my story. Wear that blue dress I bought you in New York. On weekends, we would have dinner with his parents. These visits became a torture for me. Lowell continued to treat me condescendingly, often making remarks about my origin, taste, manners. Fletcher, at least teach your wife how to hold a wine glass properly, he might say in the middle of dinner, as if I weren't there. Fletcher never stood up for me. On the contrary, he often joined his father in correcting me or apologizing for my faults. I'm sorry, Father. Ingrid is still learning. She hasn't had the opportunity to master the intricacies of etiquette in her former life. By the end of my first year of marriage, I had pretty much stopped hanging out with my girlfriends. Zoe had moved to Nashville. Tasha was immersed in motherhood after the twins were born, and Darla and I had grown increasingly distant. She was more interested in my glamorous stories about my life with Fletcher than my real feelings. Mom called once a week, but our conversations became increasingly strained. I didn't want to disappoint her by admitting that my perfect life wasn't so perfect. For our second anniversary, Fletcher gave me a diamond necklace. It was gorgeous, too gorgeous for me. I wore it to the charity ball that same night, feeling like a mannequin on which an expensive piece had been hung. Mrs. Langford, what a stunning necklace. The guests admired it. No one said, Ingrid, you look lovely, or Ingrid, how are you? I became an appendage to the family name, to the status, to the jewelry. In the third year of marriage, I began to notice a change in Fletcher. He was staying late at work more and more often. He smelled of unfamiliar perfumes, and his shirts sometimes had lipstick on them. Classic signs of infidelity that I studiously ignored. When I tried to talk to him, he accused me of being paranoid. I run a business, Ingrid, he said irritably. I can't account for every minute. You spend too much time alone, so you make up nonsense. He was right about that. I did spend a lot of time alone. I tried painting, enrolled in photography classes, even thought about volunteering at the local library. But every time I found something I was truly passionate about, Fletcher or his parents found a way to show me that it didn't fit my status. Volunteering at the library? Evelyn interjected when I mentioned it at dinner. Geez, Ingrid, there are special people for that. Langford's wife should be doing something more status. Our intimate life had changed too. Fletcher showed less and less interest, and when he did, the sex was mechanical, without the same passion. More and more often he fell asleep in the guest bedroom, explaining that he didn't want to wake me when he came home late. I began to suspect that he was seeing another woman, but I was afraid to find out the truth. After all, what would I do with that knowledge? Divorce would mean losing everything: my home, my status, my financial stability. I'd be right back where I started, only 6 years later, and with a broken heart to boot. One day, going through the pockets of his jacket before sending it to the dry cleaners, a habit I picked up from my mother, I found a receipt from a jewelry store, a $12,000 necklace purchased the day before. Our anniversary was long gone. My birthday was a month away. It couldn't have been meant for me. That night I cried for the first time in a long time, sitting on the floor of the dressing room, clutching the ill-fated check to my chest. Prudence found me there, brought me tea, sat down beside me. All the men in this family are the same, darling, she said quietly. They think money entitles them to everything. Do you know who he's with? I asked, wiping away my tears. She shook her head. I don't know exactly, but there's this fitness instructor at his club. A tall blonde. They have lunch together sometimes. What should I do, Prudence? My voice was shaking. What all women in your position do, ma'am. Close your eyes and pretend nothing's happening. Or leave. Walk away. The word sounded both frightening and liberating at the same time. But I wasn't ready. I was too afraid of the unknown, too used to the comfort of being married to Fletcher despite the humiliation. So I continued to live in a golden cage day after day, pretending not to notice the obvious. Fletcher pretended everything was fine too. We attended receptions and fundraisers, smiled in family photos, exchanged holiday gifts. The perfect couple, the perfect life, from the outside. On the day everything changed, nothing seemed to portend trouble. It was a Tuesday, mid-October. I was planning the menu for a charity luncheon I was to organize the following month. The phone rang out of the blue. Mrs. Langford? There's an unfamiliar voice on the phone. It's the Memphis police. Your husband's been in a car accident. The world slowed down. I remember running to the car, speeding to the hospital, praying to all the gods I never believed in. But it was too late. Fletcher was killed on the spot, his Jaguar slamming full speed into the concrete abutment of the bridge. The police officer, a young black man with kind eyes, said that the accident happened on the expressway. According to preliminary reports, Fletcher failed to control himself on the wet road. He was alone in the car. Forensics showed no alcohol in his blood. I stood in the hospital hallway trying to comprehend what had happened. My husband was dead. The man I had lived with for 6 years, the man I continued to love despite everything, would never come home again. The next few days became one endless nightmare. Identifying the body was the worst ordeal of my life. Fletcher looked almost lifelike, except for the strange pallor and unnatural pose. I touched his hand, cold, hard, and realized it was really over. Lowell and Evelyn took care of the funeral arrangements. They picked out the casket, the church, the guest list. I was a blur, mechanically nodding and agreeing to everything. My mom drove down from Florida to support me. She stayed in the guest house because Evelyn had subtly hinted that the main house was too much fuss with the arrangements. The funeral was held at the Main Presbyterian Church in Memphis. Hundreds of people came to say goodbye to Fletcher Langford. Businessmen, politicians, the cream of society. Most of them I saw for the first time. They came up and expressed their condolences, but in their eyes I could read curiosity. What would happen to the young widow, to the inheritance, to the business? At the funeral I noticed a woman, a tall blonde with an impeccable figure. She stood apart from the others and wept silently. I wouldn't have paid any attention to her if I hadn't noticed Lowell walk up to her and say something quietly. She nodded and quickly wiped away her tears. I recognized her, the same fitness instructor from Fletcher's club. I'd seen her picture on the club's website when I'd once searched for information about my husband's possible mistress, tormented by suspicion. "Who's that?" I asked Prudence when we got home from the ceremony. She was silent for a long moment, as if deciding whether to tell me the truth. "It's Odette Taylor," she said at last. "She, was close to your husband." "Close?" I didn't realize it right away. "They dated for over 2 years, ma'am. Everyone in the house knew. I'm sorry. This news should have crushed me, but strangely I felt only tired. It was as if the last piece of the puzzle had fallen into place, and the picture finally made sense. All the late returns, all the business dinners, all the excuses, all pointed to her, to this Odette Taylor. "She was at the funeral," I said in a lifeless voice. "Crying." "Of course she cried," Prudence snorted. "She'd lost her ticket to high society. But I saw her eyes. There was real pain in them, no pretense. Maybe she really did love him. Maybe more than I have lately." A week after the funeral, the notary set up an appointment for the reading of the will. I wasn't expecting much. I assumed the entire estate would go to me as the legal spouse. How wrong I was. Everyone was in the notary's office. Me, Lowell and Evelyn, several of Fletcher's cousins, and to my surprise, the blonde woman from the funeral, Odette Taylor. She looked calm and confident, as if she had every right to be here. Mr. Holland, an elderly notary with a neat gray beard, coughed and began to read the will. The first few paragraphs dealt with business assets. They went to Lowell and business associates. Then came something that turned my world upside down completely. "To my beloved Odette Taylor, who has been the light of my life for the past few years, I leave my principal residence, the house at 23 Magnolia Drive, with all its contents and grounds," the notary read. Our house. Our house went to his mistress. I felt the room begin to spin around me. "To my wife, Ingrid Langford," Mr. Holland continued. "I leave the property I own at 146 Oak Street, on the outskirts of East Memphis." I have never heard of that address. Fletcher never mentioned that he had any property in that part of town. "What is it?" I asked, interrupting the notary. "What kind of property?" Lowell grinned. "An old shack he bought years ago when he thought he could invest in real estate on his own," he answered. It was practically a wreck. I shifted my gaze to Odette. She didn't hide her triumphant smile. There was a superiority in her eyes. She'd won. She'd won the house, the life that was supposed to be mine. "That's it?" I could barely speak. "After 6 years of marriage?" Mr. Holland nodded embarrassedly. "The will is legally sound, Mrs. Langford. You have the right to contest it, but I must warn you, the chances are slim." "Don't waste your time with the courts, Ingrid," Lowell interjected. "We all know that for the last few years your marriage has existed only on paper. Fletcher left you something, and you should be grateful for it." His words hit harder than a slap. 6 years of my life wasted on this man, and his family was now being judged as, at least something. I stood up, feeling my knees shake. When do I have to vacate the house? I asked, looking directly at Odette. According to the terms of the will, within 30 days, the notary answered. I nodded, grabbed my bag, and headed for the exit. At the door, I turned around. They were all sitting there, the family that had never been mine, the woman who had stolen my husband, and they were looking at me with a mixture of pity and contempt. You know, I said, surprised at the calmness of my voice, perhaps this shack is the best thing I've ever gotten from the Langford family. With these words, I left the study, closing the door behind me. The unknown lay ahead of me, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a strange release. All I had now were the keys to an unknown house on the outskirts of town and a determination to find out exactly what Fletcher had left me as an inheritance. When I returned home after the reading of the will, I found Fletcher's bedroom door locked. A note on the door, written in Evelyn's calligraphic handwriting, read, Lowell and I have taken Fletcher's personal effects. The rest of the property passes to Ms. Taylor according to the will. Ms. Taylor. Not even Mrs. Just a mistress who got everything that should have belonged to me. I crumpled up the note and tossed it in the wastepaper basket. By the looks of it, I had only days left in this house. Odette was probably already picking out new curtains and furniture, imagining what it would be like to live in my, now her, house. I walked into my dressing room, glancing through the rows of dresses, shoes, bags, all of them Fletcher's purchases, chosen with his taste and his family's preferences in mind. None of them reflected the real me, the woman I was before I met him. In the corner stood the old suitcase I'd come to this house with 6 years ago. I pulled it out, ran my hand over the worn leather. Where to start? Which of all this abundance was truly mine? In the end, I decided to take the bare minimum, a few pairs of jeans and t-shirts I'd bought myself, my favorite sneakers, the shabby copy of Jane Eyre my mother had given me for my 18th birthday. The jewelry, even the ones Fletcher had given me for birthdays and anniversaries, I kept. They were never truly mine either. Prudence found me sitting on the floor among the scattered things. Are you leaving, ma'am? She asked, though the answer was obvious. Yes. I looked up at her. It seemed I had only one place to go, this shack Lowell had mentioned. Prudence sat down beside me on the edge of the bed. Have you seen this house? No, I didn't even know it existed until today. She paused, as if wondering if she should say anything. Mr. Fletcher bought it before you met him. Never brought guests there, never mentioned it in conversation. Have you been there? No, ma'am. But Mr. Fletcher's driver, Kevin, took him there a few times. Said the house was unremarkable but in good condition. It got me thinking. Why would Mr. Fletcher, with his taste for luxury and status, want a modest house in the suburbs? And why would he leave it to me? Maybe we should go and see it, Prudence went on. Maybe it's not as bad as Mr. Lowell describes. I nodded. Of course, Lowell would downplay the value of anything that went to me. Not his precious family business or his son's new favorite. I'll go tonight, I decided. I just couldn't stand to be in this house anymore. Take my number. Prudence handed me a piece of paper with handwritten numbers on it. Just in case. Be careful, ma'am. Her last words sounded strange. What was she afraid of? What could be dangerous in that house? But I just thanked her, put the rest of my things in my suitcase, and left the room without looking back. I decided to drive my car, the one thing that was definitely mine, and not the Langford family's. It was a used Volkswagen Beetle, bought before I was married. Fletcher hated that car, called it a tin horn, and repeatedly offered to replace it with something more befitting Mrs. Langford's status. But I stubbornly refused, and that was probably the only time I ever insisted. Typing the address into the navigator, I drove out of the courtyard of the mansion I'd lived in for 6 years, feeling a strange mixture of devastation and relief. East Memphis, where I was going, was a working-class neighborhood, not a slum, but not the upscale place where the Langfords and their kind lived. On the way, my thoughts went back to the years I'd spent with Fletcher. At first, he seemed to admire my independence and directness, qualities rare among the women of his circle. But gradually, his admiration was replaced by a desire to change me, to conform me to his family's standards. I remembered an incident in the second year of our marriage. We were invited to a reception at the mayor's house in Memphis. I wore a new dress, emerald green, open back. Fletcher looked me over with an appraising gaze and wrinkled his nose. Too provocative for Langford's wife, he said. Wear something more conservative, black or navy. But I like this dress, I objected. And it's not flashy at all, it's just bright. Ingrid, his voice became harder. There will be important people there. Partners, clients, politicians. You represent our family. Don't make me blush for you. I ended up wearing the black dress he'd chosen, and all evening I felt invisible among the bright, shiny guests. No one remembered me, no one paid attention. I was just another faceless wife in a black dress. And then there was the incident with my job. In my third year of marriage, I decided I wanted to go back to a career. Not in a call center, of course, but maybe PR or marketing. I even interviewed at a small agency and got a job offer. Fletcher was furious when I told him about it over dinner. Are you crazy? He put his fork down. Langford's wife can't work at some agency for pennies. What will people say? I don't care what people say. I'm going crazy with idleness, Fletcher. I need something to do besides charity dinners and shopping. You have things to do. He looked at me like I was a whimsical child. A home, social engagements. Besides, we were talking about children. It's a good time to think about that. Children. His universal argument when it came to my independence. I wanted children, but not on those terms. Not as a way to tie me down to the house, to take away the last vestiges of my freedom. I want to realize myself as a person first, I said then. And then think about children. He laughed, but it wasn't funny. Realize yourself? Ingrid, you're my wife. Isn't that enough? In his world, yes. Being Langford's wife was the pinnacle of achievement for a woman. Anything else was considered a whim to be nipped in the bud. In the end, I turned down the job offer and continued my meaningless life as a socialite. The navigator announced that I was approaching my destination, snapping me out of my bitter memories. I entered a quiet neighborhood with neat little houses. Ordinary people lived here, teachers, nurses, office workers. People who made an honest living, not family connections and shady deals. Oak Street turned out to be a quiet street with rows of one-story houses, probably built in the 60s. Most of them were well-maintained fresh paint, neat lawns, flowers on the porches. I drove slowly along the street, looking for number 146. Finally, I saw it, an unremarkable house with a white facade and dark blue shutters. Small but in good condition, with a small, well-kept garden. Nothing like the hovel Lowell had described it as. I parked at the curb and just sat in the car for a few minutes, looking at my new possession. What was waiting for me inside? Empty rooms? Old furniture? Or something else that Fletcher wanted to keep from his family and from me? Gathering my courage, I got out of the car, grabbed my suitcase from the trunk, and headed for the front door. The key that the notary had given me went easily into the lock. The door opened without a creak, revealing a dark hallway. I fumbled for the light switch and soft light flooded the space. The hallway was small but cozy. Wooden flooring, beige walls, and a simple clothes rack. No signs of neglect or ruin. On the contrary, the house looked lived in and well-maintained, as if someone had come to clean it regularly. I walked on and found myself in the living room. There was a sofa, 2 armchairs, a coffee table, and a small bookcase. There were abstract paintings in simple frames on the walls. Nothing special, but everything was tasteful and obviously more expensive than one would expect from a shack on the outskirts. The kitchen was also a pleasant surprise, clean, with new appliances and a full set of dishes. In the refrigerator, I found a bottle of wine and several packages of frozen food with a production date of 2 weeks ago. Someone had been here recently and was preparing for the arrival of... Who? Me? Or was Fletcher planning to come here himself? The bedroom was decorated in calm colors: beige, light blue, a little green. A large comfortable bed with a soft blanket, bedside tables, a closet. On one of the nightstands was a framed photograph. I took it in my hands and felt a lump come up in my throat. It was Fletcher, but not the dapper businessman I knew. He was a young guy in his 20s, wearing jeans and a t-shirt, his hair disheveled and an open smile. Next to him stood a girl, also young, laughing, with a mop of red hair. They looked happy, real, alive. I'd never seen that picture before. I'd never seen Fletcher so carefree, so free. Who was this girl? First love? An ex-girlfriend he never told me about? Putting the photograph aside, I continued to look around the house. Besides the bedroom, there was another room that appeared to be a study. A desk, a computer chair, and bookshelves along the walls. There was an old computer on the desk, with a stack of papers next to it. I walked over to the desk, running my hand over its smooth surface. What was Fletcher doing here? Why did he need this secret house that no one knew about? Pulling out the top drawer of the desk, I found the usual office supplies: pens, paper clips, notepads. In the second drawer were folders of some kind. I pulled one out at random and opened it. It was the Langford Car Wash's financial statements for the past year. Columns of numbers, graphs, tables. Nothing unusual at first glance. I'd never taken much interest in Fletcher's business, but it was obvious even to me that this was standard documentation. The third drawer revealed a safe, small but sturdy, with a digital lock. I wondered, what code could Fletcher have used? Our wedding date? Unlikely, given the way he'd disposed of his possessions. His date of birth? Also too obvious. I remembered the picture in the bedroom. A young, happy Fletcher with an unknown red-headed girl. Maybe. I dialed the first combination I could think of. 2604, April 26th, his birthday. The lock wouldn't budge. Second try, 1507, our wedding day. Again it failed, I wondered. What else could be important to Fletcher? What could he have used as the password to the safe where he obviously kept something valuable or secret? Suddenly it hit me. The number of this house was 146. I dialed 146. The lock clicked and the safe door opened. There were 3 things inside: a thick file folder, a flash drive, and wads of cash tied up with bank tape. I pulled it all out and placed it on the table. The money looked impressive, several wads of $100 each. A quick count showed that there was about 50,000 here, not a fortune, but enough to start a new life. The flash drive was plain, unmarked. I plugged it into the computer, which, to my surprise, turned on without a password. The flash drive contained a single folder called Insurance. Inside the folder were video files, each with a name and date. Marcus Higgins, March 12, 2022. Daniel Kowalski, July 7, 2023. William Spencer, January 25, 2024. The names told me nothing, but the dates were relatively recent. I opened one file at random, Marcus Higgins. The video showed an office that looked like a study in the Langford house. Behind the desk sat a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, probably Marcus Higgins himself. Across from him was Fletcher. They were discussing some kind of deal involving the zoning of land for a new car wash. 5,000 for the vote on the city council as agreed, Fletcher said, handing over the envelope. 5 more when the papers are signed. Do you realize the risk I'm taking? Higgins asked, taking the envelope. If anyone finds out. No one will find out. Fletcher smiled. We'd both have too much to lose. I turned off the video, feeling a chill run down my spine. Fletcher was recording his corrupt deals? Why? As a guarantee that he wouldn't get cheated? Or as dirt on the people he did business with? I opened another file. Daniel Kowalski. This one showed a restaurant, expensive, with dimmed lights. Fletcher and an overweight man with balding hair sat at a corner table. Judging by the date on the video, this was taken recently, less than a year ago. We've been doing this for 3 years, Daniel, Fletcher said. Car washes are the perfect business for laundering. Cash, high traffic, minimal costs. But the IRS is getting more and more careful, Kowalski said. We have to be careful with the volume. My father's in control, Fletcher said confidently. He's got connections in all the right places. I turned off the video too, feeling nausea rising in my throat. Money laundering? Corruption? Is that what Fletcher was really doing? Is that what the Langford family's wealth was built on? With shaky hands, I opened the file folder. Inside were financial statements, but not the official ones given to the tax authorities. These were the real accounting records of a chain of car washes, with double documentation, falsified expenses, artificially inflated revenues. The scheme was complicated, but even though I wasn't a financier, I could see its illegality. The last pages revealed bank statements for offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. The amounts of the transfers were in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Next to it was a copy of a power of attorney in Fletcher Langford's name, authorizing him to handle those accounts. I leaned back in my chair, trying to make sense of what I saw. Fletcher hadn't just left me a house, he'd left me evidence of his family's criminal activities, evidence that could destroy the Langford empire if it fell into the hands of the authorities. But why? To protect me? To give me a weapon against my father? Or was this his way of making amends for years of lies and manipulation? I looked again at the flash drive, at the documents, at the money. All of this made me more than just an ex-wife who got a shack instead of a mansion. It made me dangerous. A man with information that could put powerful people in the city behind bars. At that moment, I remembered Prudence's last words. "Be careful, ma'am." Did she know what Fletcher would leave me? Did she suspect that this inconspicuous house held such dangerous secrets? I put the documents back in the folder, pulled the flash drive from the computer. Now I had to decide what to do with this information. Use it as leverage against Lowell? Turn it over to the authorities? Or take the money and disappear, leaving the past behind? One thing I knew for sure, at that moment my life changed irrevocably. The shack on the outskirts was not a pittance, but the key to freedom. Freedom from the Langfords, from their world of falsehood and pretense, from the role I had played all these years. I walked to the bedroom, picked up the picture of young Fletcher with the red-haired girl again. Whoever she was, she knew the real Fletcher, the one who existed before family and money changed him. Maybe deep down he was still the guy in the picture, enough to make the right choice in the end. Sitting on the bed in that strange house, with evidence of the crimes in my hands and a pile of cash, I felt strong for the first time in a long time. Not as Langford's wife, not as a socialite playing her assigned role, but simply as Ingrid, a woman who had finally had a chance to take her destiny into her own hands. I didn't sleep a wink all night. I sat in the small kitchen of the Oak Street house, drinking strong tea and thinking about my situation. On the one hand, I possessed a powerful weapon against the Langford family, the evidence of their criminal activity. On the other hand, using that weapon could be dangerous. People involved in money laundering and corruption would stop at nothing to protect themselves. By morning, I had made my decision. I didn't want revenge. Revenge wouldn't bring back my lost years or heal my mental wounds. I wanted freedom, financial and emotional independence from everything that tied me to my past. At the nearest bank, I opened a new account in my maiden name, Ingrid Prentice. I deposited most of the money I'd found, $40,000. I kept the rest for the first time. Then I went to an internet cafe downtown where I rented a computer. The first thing I did was create a new anonymous email address. Then I copied the most important documents and videos onto a new flash drive. The source material stayed in the Oak Street house, safely hidden under the bedroom floorboards. I thought long and hard about who to give the information to. The local police or prosecutor's office didn't seem like a good fit. The risk of Lowell using his connections was too great. Federal agencies seemed like the best option, but how could an ordinary citizen get their attention? In the end, I decided to start with the IRS. Financial crimes were their area of expertise, and the evidence of tax evasion in my hands looked convincing enough to start an investigation. I drafted an anonymous letter, trying to be very specific and leave no trace that could lead back to me. I attached a few key documents and video clips to the letter. Then I sent it all to the regional tax office. When I finished, I took a deep breath. Bridges had been burned. Now all that was left to do was wait and prepare for the next step, disappearing from Memphis. Over the next few days, I set about finding a new place to live. I wanted to move far enough away to start with a clean slate, but not so far away that I felt completely disconnected from everything familiar. Asheville, North Carolina seemed like the perfect option. A small, picturesque town 5 hours outside of Memphis, known for its creative atmosphere and independent spirit. Through an online real estate rental service, I found a small house on the outskirts of Asheville. Nothing luxurious, 2 bedrooms, living room, kitchen, small garden. But it was exactly what I needed. I arranged a long-term lease with the landlady, put down a down payment, and planned to move in a week. In that time, I needed to sort out my belongings at the Langford mansion and legally finalize all ties to my past life. I hired a lawyer who specialized in divorce proceedings, although in my case it was just a matter of formal widow's papers. When I returned to the mansion, the atmosphere had changed. Evelyn and Lowell were tense, avoiding looking me in the eye. Odette, who Prudence had said had already started measuring curtains and planning renovations, was gone too. Was something wrong? I asked Prudence when we were alone. She looked around as if to see if anyone was listening and lowered her voice. Some people from the IRS came by, asked questions, took some documents. Mr. Lowell's furious. They said they froze the company's accounts. I made a surprised face. The IRS? Why would they do that? No one knows. Prudence shrugged. But Mr. Lowell is sure someone set them up. He's making inquiries, calling his contacts in the city government. She was silent for a moment, then added quietly. The IRS agent who started the investigation died yesterday. A car accident on the highway, just like Mr. Fletcher. My insides just snapped. Dead? Are you sure it's connected? I can't say, ma'am. But people are talking. He was a young man, James Courtney, only 34 years old, wife, 2 small children. I was overcome with guilt and fear. I had jeopardized an innocent man who was just doing his job. What if his death really wasn't an accident? What if Lowell or his connections were involved? It's horrible, I whispered, trying to hide my shock. Yes, ma'am, and that's not all. Mr. Samuel Ward, deputy manager of a car wash on Main Street, threw himself out of the window of his 12th floor apartment. Left a note saying he couldn't take the pressure. They say he was one of the guys who helped with the money laundering. Another death. Another life cut short because of the investigation I'd launched. I could feel the nausea rising in my throat. Mrs. Evelyn's not good either, Prudence continued. She had a heart attack yesterday when she found out about the frozen accounts. She's in the hospital now. I'm going to leave Memphis, I told Prudence. Too many memories. She nodded understandingly. Good decision, ma'am. Sometimes it's better to start over. You could not tell the Langfords about this? At least until I'm gone. Of course. She smiled slightly. I've always been on your side, though I couldn't show it openly. Be careful. Mr. Lowell has brought in a private detective. I heard him talking to him on the phone. News of the death of a tax agent, the suicide of a car wash deputy manager, and Evelyn's heart attack accelerated my plans. I decided to leave in 2 days instead of a week. I hurriedly packed my things, trying not to attract attention. But the day before I was scheduled to leave, the meeting I had hoped to avoid took place. I was coming down the stairs with a box of books when Lowell appeared in the hall. He looked gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes, but his gaze was still piercing and cold. Ah, Ingrid, he said with feigned nonchalance. Going somewhere? Yes, I decided not to quibble. I'm leaving Memphis. There are too many memories. He nodded, pretending to understand. It's a smart decision. Where are you headed? I shrugged. I hadn't decided yet. Maybe to my mom's in Florida, or my brother in Chicago. You have to lie convincingly. Neither my mother nor my brother lived in those places, but Lowell had never been interested in my family enough to know that. We're having a little trouble with the IRS, he said after a pause. Some kind of misunderstanding, but it's a curious coincidence that it all started shortly after Fletcher died. I tried to look surprised. I don't know where you're going with this, Lowell. He took a step closer, and I had to restrain myself from backing away. You know, Ingrid, I've always thought you were inappropriate for our family, too simple, too straightforward. But now I wonder if maybe you're smarter than you look. His words were tinged with suspicion, but without specific accusations. He was probing the ground, trying to elicit a reaction. If you're implying that I have something to do with your problems, you're wrong, I replied calmly. I don't know anything about Fletcher's business. You've always said it's not a woman's business. He looked at me with a long, scrutinizing gaze. Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm just looking for enemies where there aren't any. Did you hear about James Courtney's accident? The young man from the IRS? Terrible tragedy. His tone became almost ingratiating with a hint of fake sympathy. Yeah, I heard something. I tried to keep my voice steady. A car accident, I think? Yeah. It's a weird coincidence, don't you think? It's very similar to the way Fletcher died. Fate can be cruel to those who mind their own business. Did you hear about Samuel Ward? Terrible story. Young man with his whole life ahead of him, and suddenly decides to cut it off. There was a barely concealed threat in every word he said. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I kept my composure. The world is full of tragedies, Lowell, and no one knows when the next one will hit us. Philosophical, he smiled wryly. Well, I won't keep you. Good luck in your new place, Ingrid. I hope you find what you're looking for. And remember road safety. Don't speed, especially in the rain, and always check your brakes before you go any farther. There was a clear threat in his words, but I kept my cool. Thanks for your concern, Lowell. All the best to you and Evelyn. I hope she gets well soon. That evening, I left the Langford mansion for good, taking the last of my boxes of belongings. I left the keys to the house on the hall table, next to a note to Odette. The house is yours. I hope it brings you more happiness than it did me. I spent the night at the cabin on Oak Street, planning to leave for Asheville early in the morning. Sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, I looked out at the quiet street and thought about the strange twists and turns of fate. Until a month ago, I had been Mrs. Langford, the wife of a successful businessman, a resident of a fashionable neighborhood. Now I was Ingrid Prentice, a widow, owner of a modest little house, and keeper of dangerous secrets. I couldn't stop thinking about the dead tax agent, Samuel Ward's suicide, Evelyn's heart attack. My decision led to a chain of tragedies I could not have foreseen. I wanted justice, but the price was too high. In the morning, after loading my things into the car, I walked around the house one last time. In the bedroom, I again picked up the picture of young Fletcher with the red-haired girl. After some hesitation, I decided to take it with me as a reminder that even the most screwed-up people could still have some good in them. The drive to Asheville took about 5 hours. I drove carefully, glancing around often to see if anyone was following me. Lowell's threat lingered in my mind. What if he really had hired someone to give me an accident? What if the story with Fletcher and the tax agent repeated itself with me? But it seemed I'd managed to get away unnoticed. My new house was even cozier than it looked in the picture, small but bright, with a terrace overlooking an overgrown garden. The owner, Mrs. Caulfield, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and wispy gray hair, met me at the door. You must be Ingrid, she smiled, extending her hand. Welcome to Asheville. Thank you, I returned the handshake. I hope I like it here. Oh, I'm sure you will. It's a special place for those who want a fresh start. It was like she read my mind. We signed the lease. She handed me the keys and left me alone to settle in. The first few days in Asheville were spent settling in. I bought new furniture, simple but comfortable, far from the pompous luxury of the Langford house. Explored the neighborhood, found a cozy cafe where you could drink a cup of good coffee, and a bookstore with a collection of classic literature. A week after moving in, I decided to check out the news from Memphis. The local online newspaper found a short note. The Internal Revenue Service is auditing the Langford car wash chain. Company officials declined to comment. There was also information about James Courtney's funeral and a fundraiser for his family. A photo of a smiling young man with his wife and 2 little girls cut to the heart. Another article reported the death of Evelyn Langford. A second heart attack proved fatal. Mrs. Langford did not survive the news of the possible bankruptcy of the family business, the reporter wrote. A photograph of Evelyn, haughty and elegant even in her hospital bed, was accompanied by a comment from a priest about a woman of unbending will and loyalty to family values. The investigation continued. I followed the news using an anonymous browser. Gradually, they became more and more disturbing for the Langfords. Langford accounts frozen as part of tax fraud investigation. Lowell Langford has been summoned for questioning by federal prosecutors. 2 Memphis City Council members have been arrested on charges of accepting bribes from Langford's company. But there was more frightening news. Investigative journalist Eric Freeman, who was working on a story about city council corruption, was found dead in his apartment. Police are considering suicide. Former Langford accountant Raymond Haggerty has gone missing. Relatives have contacted the police. A tragic fire at the offices of law firm Benson and Partners has claimed the lives of 3 employees. Among the dead was attorney Patrick Benson, who represented the IRS in the case against Lowell Langford. With each new publication, I felt a growing sense of guilt. Innocent people were dying because of my decision. I didn't want revenge, I only wanted justice and freedom. But the chain of events I set in motion led to tragic consequences. One day I came across an article that made me freeze. Odette Taylor, heiress to the estate of the late Fletcher Langford, is facing a bank demand for repayment of $700,000 in debts. According to Ms. Taylor, she was unaware of the existence of a mortgage on the house. The bank began foreclosure proceedings against the mortgaged property. So that was the catch. The house that Fletcher left to his mistress was mortgaged. He knew the company's accounts would be frozen, the IRS would investigate. He knew, and set a trap not only for his father, but also for the woman he cheated on me with. 2 weeks after I moved in, I got a call from an unknown number. Normally I didn't answer these calls, but this time something told me to pick up the phone. Ingrid? Prudence's familiar voice sounded tense. It's me. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Prudence! I was genuinely glad to hear her. No, I'm fine. How are you? How's, everything in there? It's pretty bad, ma'am. The company's on the verge of bankruptcy. Mr. Lowell's under investigation. Mrs. Evelyn. You may have heard. No one's lived in the house since the funeral. And now, Mr. Lowell's younger brother, Howard, has committed suicide. Couldn't take the shame and financial ruin. Another death. I never met Howard. He lived in Europe and rarely came to Memphis. But it was another life cut short by events I set in motion. Yeah, I didn't know, I mumbled. I'm sorry. It's not over yet, ma'am. People are disappearing or dying. Everyone connected to the investigation. Last one was Attorney Benson, burned to death in his office. They say it was a short circuit, but nobody believes it. And Mr. Lowell. He's still looking for the guy who gave the documents to the IRS. That detective followed you, knows you're in Asheville. My blood froze in my veins. They found me. Thanks for the warning. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I'll be careful. There's something else you should know, Prudence continued. Mr. Fletcher spoke to me about you before he died. He said he'd done you an injustice, but he hoped to make it up to you in some way. Make it right? I felt my pulse quicken. Did you know about the cabin on Oak Street? What was kept there? Not everything, but I had a hunch. Mr. Fletcher said he'd leave you the key to freedom. Said only you could use it properly. Why? That's the question that's been on my mind ever since I found the documents. Why would he do that? Prudence sighed. He had changed a lot in recent months, after the doctors diagnosed him. Diagnosis? I froze. What are you talking about? They found a brain tumor, ma'am. Inoperable. The doctors gave him 6 months at most. That news stunned me. Fletcher was dying and he knew it. His death in the car accident wasn't an accident? Did he'd chosen that end himself? I asked, barely hearing my voice. I don't know for sure, Prudence answered quietly. But he was very calm that day, as if he had made an important decision. He told me he was finally going to do something right, and he asked me to tell you, when it was over, that the girl in the picture was Laurel. She was his first love before Mr. Lowell forced him into the family business. Laurel, the red-haired girl in the picture. The love Fletcher had lost by choosing the path his father had set out for him. He also said the house on Oak Street was their place, Prudence continued. They bought it together, dreamed of living there. But Mr. Lowell was against it, threatening to disinherit his son if he didn't break up with that working-class girl. So Mr. Fletcher chose money and status. What happened to her? Laurel? I asked. She left Memphis. But Mr. Fletcher kept the house even though he never lived there. Said it was a reminder of the one good choice he'd never made. A lot of things were becoming clear now. Fletcher, knowing his imminent death, had decided to right at least some of the wrong he had caused, to give me a chance at freedom and at the same time to get revenge on his father, who had manipulated him all his life, Made him give up love for money and status. He loved you in his own way, ma'am, Prudence said, as if she'd read my mind. He just didn't know how to show it properly. He'd lived by his father's rules for too long. After that conversation, I sat on the terrace of my new house for a long time, thinking about the paradoxes of life and what I should do next. I couldn't stay in Asheville knowing that Lowell had found me, but I didn't want to run away again either. I decided to take precautions, set alarms in the house, varied my travel routes, kept a close eye on my surroundings, and I kept up with the news from Memphis. 3 weeks after my conversation with Prudence, unexpected news arrived. Lowell Langford, head of the Langford Company, was found dead in his office. The preliminary theory is suicide. A suicide note confessing to financial fraud was found next to the body. Suicide? Lowell Langford, an overbearing, ruthless man who stopped at nothing for money and power, killed himself? I didn't believe it for a second. Too convenient, too timely. Subsequent news reports confirmed my suspicions. An investigation into the death of Lowell Langford has uncovered evidence of his connection to organized crime. Police sources say Langford may have been eliminated by former associates who feared exposure. So that's who was behind the disappearances and accidents, not just Lowell, but his criminal partners. They probably got rid of him when he became a threat to their safety. I set off a chain reaction that went far beyond my intentions. All I wanted was justice and freedom, and in the end, a few people died. Others lost everything they had. An entire dynasty wiped off the face of the earth in a matter of weeks. The cost was prohibitive. A month after I moved, I got a job at the local newspaper. Nothing grandiose. I wrote small articles about city events and interviewed locals. But for the first time in years, I was doing something I really enjoyed. At the same time, I anonymously donated a substantial sum to the James Courtney Family Fund. It couldn't bring the children back their father, but at least it provided for them financially. A small atonement for a huge guilt. In the evenings, sitting on the terrace of my new home, I often thought about what had happened. The chain of events that led to the fall of the Langford Empire. Of the people whose lives had been cut short or irreparably maimed in that maelstrom. About myself, a woman who wanted only justice, but received on his conscience a heavy load of other people's deaths. Was I to blame for what happened? Of course I was the one who sent the paperwork to the IRS. But could I have foreseen that it would lead to such a series of tragedies? Did I want someone to die? No, I only wanted freedom from a toxic family that had controlled and humiliated me for 6 years. The true culprits were the Langfords themselves and their criminal partners. They were the ones who committed the crimes. They were the ones who chose to eliminate witnesses. They were the ones who chose to kill rather than be held accountable for their actions. I only shed light on their dark deeds. But these rationalizations could not drown out the voice of conscience that haunted me at night. I dreamed of the faces of the dead James Courtney, Samuel Ward, Evelyn, Howard, even Lowell. They looked at me with mute reproach, as if to say, "It's your fault. You're the one who ruined our lives." One morning, about 2 months after I moved to Asheville, I found an envelope on my doorstep. No stamps, no address. Someone had brought it personally. Inside was a short note typed on a computer. "We know it's you. We look forward to getting to know you better." I was filled with dread. Someone had tracked me down. Someone who knew of my role in exposing the Langfords. Someone who clearly didn't mean me any good. Lowell's partners? Remaining relatives? Or some people I didn't know whose interests were hurt by the collapse of the Langford Empire? I called Prudence, told her about the note. She was silent for a long time, then said quietly, "Ma'am, you need to leave. Immediately. These people, they won't stop. Look how many have died already." Over the next week, I received 2 more envelopes like that. Each contained a short, threatening note. "Meet us soon. We're getting close." The last one came with a picture of me leaving the newspaper office. The photo had been taken the day before. They were really close. They were following me, knew my routes, my work. I began to notice suspicious cars near my house, strangers looking too closely in my direction. The world was becoming a dangerous place again. I decided to take action. I gathered the essentials, money, documents. I left a note for the landlady, apologizing for my sudden departure and paying 2 months in advance. I called the editorial office and told them I had a family emergency that required an immediate departure. I left Asheville that night, heading west. No specific destination, no plan, just away from those who wished me harm. I drove for days, stopping only for short naps at roadside motels, paid cash, used made-up names at check-in. On the fourth day of the trip, somewhere in Oklahoma, I noticed a dark sedan that had been following me for hours. It changed its distance, sometimes letting other cars pass between us, but it was always in sight. I tried to pull away. I turned off onto a secondary road, then onto a narrow rural road. The sedan kept following me. At some point, it began to close the distance, clearly trying to pin me to the curb. My heart was pounding like crazy. I pushed the gas pedal to the floor, the old Volkswagen shuddering with tension. The road ahead made a sharp turn, followed by a steep downhill. I knew I wouldn't make it at that speed, but I had no choice. Brakes squealed, a scream I couldn't hear, but I could feel it in my throat. The world turned upside down, earth and sky reversed. A bang, another bang, glass clinking, metal clanging, and darkness. I woke up in a hospital. White walls, beeping monitors, the smell of antiseptics. My whole body ached, my head was splitting. There was a nurse sitting next to me, a young woman with tired eyes. "Are you awake?" she asked when she saw me open my eyes. "You're lucky, sweetheart. Such an accident, and you got away with a broken arm and a concussion." 2 days later, as I was being prepared for discharge, a man in a suit came into the room. Showed me his federal agent ID. "Ms. Prentice?" He sat down in the chair next to the bed. "My name is Robert Daniels. I'm with the FBI. We need to talk about the Langford family." I froze. That's it. They'd found me, not Lowell's criminal associates, but the federal authorities. "I'm listening," I said quietly. "We know it was you who sent the documents to the IRS. The materials that launched the investigation against Lowell Langford and his associates. I didn't deny it. What's the point?" "How did you find me?" "Your accident wasn't an accident." He leaned closer. "You were indeed being followed. But we were being followed too, by them. Our agents were in the neighborhood when the accident happened. They spooked your pursuers and called an ambulance." "Who were they?" I felt nausea coming up my throat. "Mercenaries working for the Espinoza cartel. Lowell Langford laundered money for them through his chain of car washes. When the tax scandal started, the cartel decided to eliminate all potential threats. James Courtney, Eric Freeman, Patrick Benson were all killed on their orders. Samuel Ward's suicide had been staged, too. I closed my eyes, trying to deal with the wave of horror and guilt that washed over me. And Lowell? Lowell Langford had become too dangerous for them. He knew too much to tell if he made a deal with the DA's office. They eliminated him by staging a suicide. "God," I whispered, "what have I done?" Agent Daniels shook his head. "It's not your fault what these people did, Ms. Prentice. You just shed light on criminal activity that had been going on for years. How the people involved reacted is their responsibility, not yours. But all these deaths, those deaths are on the cartel and Lowell himself for getting involved with them, not yours." I wanted to believe him. I really did. "Why are you here?" I finally asked. "To arrest me?" He smiled, the first smile of the entire conversation. "No, Ms. Prentice. We're here to offer you a defense. You're a key witness in a case that could help us disrupt an entire money laundering network in the Midwest. If you agree to cooperate, we can guarantee your safety. New name, new life, new beginning. The Witness Protection Program. A chance for a fresh start, a chance to let go of the past. And if I refuse? Then you're free to go wherever you want. But I'm not going to hide the fact that your life will be in danger. The cartel doesn't forget or forgive. They'll be looking for you until they find you." I had no choice. Not really. "I agree," I said after a long pause. "I will cooperate." The next months passed in endless interrogations, depositions, trial preparations. I told everything I knew about the Langfords, about their business, about the documents found in the house on Oak Street. The FBI agents were amazed at the amount and quality of evidence Fletcher had gathered. The trial against the remaining cartel members and their American partners became one of the most high-profile cases of the year. I did not participate in the public sessions. My testimony was submitted in writing to protect my identity. But the result exceeded all expectations: 27 convictions, the destruction of an entire criminal network, and the confiscation of millions of dollars worth of property. After the trial was over, I received a new name, new documents, a new biography. I was settled in a small town in southern New Mexico, a quiet place where everyone knows each other but isn't too nosy. I got a job at the local library, a quiet place with a minimum of contact. I bought a small house on the outskirts, got a dog from the shelter. On the outside, my life looked peaceful, almost idyllic. But inside, I still carried the weight of what had happened. The nightmares wouldn't stop. In them, I saw the faces of the dead, heard their voices blaming me for their deaths. I knew Agent Daniels was right. Their blood wasn't on my hands. But knowing and feeling are different things. About a year after I moved to New Mexico, when I was starting to get used to my new life, a letter arrived. No return address, but postmarked from Portland, Oregon. Inside was just a short note and an old photograph. I know you are safe, albeit under a different name. Fletcher would be glad you found your freedom. If you ever want to talk to someone who knows the whole story, I'll be waiting. L. The picture was the same one I'd taken from the cabin. Young Fletcher and Laurel, happy, with a lifetime ahead of them. But now there was an address written on the back, somewhere in Portland. Laurel. She'd found me, despite my new name and new life. How? Through prudence? Or did she have other sources? I thought long and hard about whether to answer. In the end, I decided to just keep the photo and address. Some stories are better left in the past, some doors unlocked. Maybe someday, when the pain and guilt had subsided, I would write to her. But not now, when the wounds are still too fresh. In the evenings, I sat in the backyard of my new house, watching the sunset and thinking about the strange twists and turns of fate. About how one decision, one action, can change so many lives, for better or worse. About how the pursuit of justice can lead to unintended consequences. And how even after the worst mistakes, a new beginning is possible. Not a carefree, not a cloudless beginning, but a beginning nonetheless. I was free. From the Langfords, from their world of falsehood and manipulation, from the role I had played for 6 years. But that freedom came at a high price, paid not only by me, but by the innocent people in the path of the hurricane I had unwittingly set in motion. I had to live with that thought. And maybe it was the realization of the price of my freedom that would keep me from ever turning again into the weak, dependent woman I'd been in my marriage to Fletcher. I would remember not only my pain, but the pain of others, and do my best to ensure that from now on, my actions would do more good than evil to the world. That was my true inheritance from Fletcher Langford. Not money, not papers, not a house, but a bitter lesson paid for at too high a price.